Good afternoon, and welcome to today's meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know. You can find us online at commonwealthclub.org, Facebook and Twitter, and on the club's YouTube channel. I'm Melissa Kane, politics reporter for CBS 5 Television in San Francisco, and your moderator. And it is my pleasure to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Tom Nichols. He's a professor of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College and the author of the new book, The Death of Expertise: The Campaign Against Established Knowledge and Why It Matters. Fake news, fake facts, and all-knowing proclamations on social media. Are we at a point where expertise is meaningless? Prompted by this concern, Tom Nichols wrote The Death of Expertise. He says people are now exposed to more information than ever before, and that as this societal gain is a societal gain, it's also helped to fuel a surge in narcissistic and misguided intellectual egalitarianism that has crippled informed debates on any number of issues. Today, he says, everyone knows everything. With a quick trip through WebMD or Wikipedia, average citizens believe themselves to be on equal intellectual footing with doctors and diplomats. All voices, even the most ridiculous, demand to be taken with equal seriousness, and any claim to the contrary is dismissed as elitism. Dr. Nichols is concerned that the current rejection of expertise and learning could threaten the survival of our democracy. So the obvious question is, who is Dr. Nichols to tell us about expertise? Is he some kind of expert? Well, yes. Before becoming a professor at the Naval War College, he taught international relations and Russian affairs at Dartmouth College and Georgetown University. Dr. Nichols was a defense and security affairs advisor to the late Senator John Heinz of Pennsylvania, and was a fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Since 2008, he's been a fellow at the International Security Program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Dr. Nichols holds a PhD from Georgetown University and, perhaps most impressively, is a 5-time undefeated Jeopardy champion. So he knows quite a number of real facts. Please welcome Dr. Tom Nichols.
Thank you so much. Well, proof again that no matter what you do in your life, going on Jeopardy makes it real. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. I want to start by saying that I reflect only my own views here, not those of the Naval War College or Harvard or anybody but myself. I think the question that I often get about this that I'll just start with is, why would I do this? Why would I write a book with such an unbelievably obnoxious title? And a subtitle that almost dares you to disagree with me. The book, actually, I never intended to write this book. I had always kind of accepted that experts get challenged. That's part of, as I say oftentimes in the book, goes with the territory. If you're an expert in something, whether it's foreign affairs, journalism, science, medicine, whatever it is, law, people will ask you questions. And really, it's your job to answer them. That's your client. Society is your client. What struck me was that over the years, that questioning of experts was moving into something different. It was turning into replacing experts. It wasn't people saying, I doubt you and I want you to explain yourself, or I have questions, or I want a second opinion, or I want to hear from somebody else. It was people saying literally, I know more about this than you do because I went to college, or, as we can talk about later, as I sometimes call it, I went to college, depending on what they did and where they went, or I watched enough television, or I surfed the internet, or whatever it was that made them think that. And the moment that kind of tripped the switch for me was about 4 years ago. I regardless of what folks may think, I actually didn't write this book about the election. I could have, but I didn't. It was during the Edward Snowden business where I, as a Russia guy, said, that we're going to find that Russia's deeply involved in this. This is a pretty obvious, for people who study Russia and the old Soviet Union, this is pretty kind of a no-brainer. I mean, this is going to be pretty obvious. And of course, a lot of folks at the time didn't want to hear that. And finally, somebody, I can't remember who it was, a younger person said, Tom, let me explain Russia to you. And I said, oh no. No. And I sat down. I used to have a blog which I don't have anymore because blogs are part of the problem, and I decided to not be part of the problem anymore, so I closed down my blog. It turned out that every thought we have doesn't need to be expressed and written down. And I sat down in front of my blog, and I kind of, as therapy, wrote a long piece where I said, people really need to understand when to listen to experts, and how you deal with expertise and how to think about it. And at that point, I didn't think much more of it. I kind of had my therapy. I felt better. I kind of wrote my way, out of being annoyed. And then a magazine came to me, a new conservative, Culture and Ideas magazine popped up, and so we'd like to have your piece. And I gave it away. I said, sure, take it. This is really an old man yelling at clouds kind of piece, and if you want it, you can have it. That's when it went viral. And within about a year, over 1 million people around the world had read it. I started getting letters, and mostly good letters. I got some, angry mail, because, you write anything, you get hate mail. But mostly, the one I remember was from a molecular biologist in France who said, "Thank you for writing this. Can I translate it and hang it on the door of my lab?" And I was like, because people are arguing with you about molecular biology? And then I started just getting letters and letters and letters. Doctors, lawyers, journalists, teachers, you name it. People in every walk of life. And people, not just from professions, photographers, electricians, anybody who has specialized knowledge has had the experience of this happening. So once again, I kind of left it at that and said, well, if I've helped people feel better, that's great. But that's when Oxford approached me and said, you should turn this into a book. And so here we are. So what do I think is happening? Let me try and distill the book down to a few minutes and get to your questions as soon as we can. I did not write a book, let's put it this way. I did not write a book about why everyone should just shut up and listen to me, or should just shut up and listen to people who have advanced degrees, or anything like that. This is, I think, one of the things that people have always been concerned about, that this is really just a way of saying, experts want deference and respect and fame and glory, and it's really not the case. As I say many times in the book, experts are the servants of a democratic society, not the masters. What I did identify, though, was, and the word I use in every time I talk about the book, what I did identify is what I think is an epidemic of narcissism that has created a society in which no one can tolerate ever being told they're wrong or that they don't know enough about something. Now, how did this happen? Well, as someone who tends to lean conservative, I blame all bad things on the 1960s. But I thought maybe I should be a little more granular about that. I think there's been a confluence of several things, including the kind of institutionalization of a youth culture that is constantly questioning to the point of incoherence sometimes, but I think it's more than that. Some of it's been aided by technology, some of it's been aided by the way we do higher education, some of it's been aided by the way our journalistic institutions have splintered into 1 million different pieces. Specifically in the book, I talk about 3 things, and I put the internet last, actually, because when I started working on this, people said, well, it's the internet, right? And and my answer was no, it predates the internet. This phenomenon actually predates the internet. I talked about education, specifically higher education, where the rush to make college a mass experience is creating a whole successive generations of people who have gone to college as an experience, but who are not actually college educated in the sense that we would once understand that, with the critical thinking skills, the breadth of exposure to ideas, the overall understanding of their own civilization. We have people that have gone to some kind of post-secondary education where they've been treated like clients. And I really hammer this in the book pretty hard, that a lot of universities, and let me just say, I still believe American universities are the best in the world. I still believe they provide the greatest education if you are conscientious about getting one. But they provide a client servicing mentality where, as one of my colleagues many years ago said to me, I don't feel like a professor, I feel like a clerk in an expensive boutique. And that has enabled all kinds of other problems, including grade inflation. Students are coming out of college and saying, well, I must know a lot of stuff. I had a 5.7 GPA on a 4.0 scale. I must be awesome, especially in math. And I think that is a serious problem. Now, one rejoinder to this is people say, well, yes, but not in STEM. Well, I can't speak for the STEM fields, and I don't know, that's not a world I'm deeply familiar with. But let's face it, most college students don't go to school and become STEM majors. This is a broader problem of a kind of faux university education. And in fact, I note in the book, and maybe it's happening here in California, because I can tell you it's definitely happening in New England, how many small colleges that were once content to be small colleges have rebranded themselves as universities? Every time I drive by a sign, it's a brand new sign that has turned some small college into, Galactic State University. And I don't understand how they managed to make that claim. But of course, that's because students want to say, I went to a university, I have a university education, when in fact they don't. So a big part of this is the client servicing mentality that takes a lot of younger people, pushes them through 4 or increasingly 5 or 6 or 7 years of an expensive undergraduate education, tells them that they're smart because we've been telling them from K through 12 that they're smart, and then we tell them for the next 4 years or 5 that they're smart, and then when they get out, they say, well, I must be able to comprehend everything because I'm smart. That's a real problem. I also talked about another field. I am an educator, but another field where I don't actually work is journalism. But I talked with a lot of journalists, and I tried to kind of unpack this problem of why isn't journalism helping us to get out of this problem? And some of it, I think, is a chicken and egg problem. Because people lack critical thinking skills. By the way, I was asked, how can we instill critical thinking skills in younger students? And I said, stop telling them they're awesome all day. That would be a good start. One of my first professors in graduate school used to start by handing out an essay he'd written called What a Student Owes a Teacher to grad students. And of course, we all kind of react to that. And it included things like trust, humility, docility. This big imposing Jesuit would just hand this to us and say, this is how we're going to start. And of course, we'd all kind of bristle. I've told this story before, but I think I'll tell it again. I passed that class, by the way. I got past this tough Jesuit philosophy professor, and I got an A. And I walked up to him thinking that I was now, his peer, smartest kid in the class and all that stuff. And I walked up to him at Christmas, at the Christmas party, and I said, what do you say, Father? I said, Merry Christmas. What do you say? Peace on earth, goodwill toward men? And he looked at me over his glasses and he said, what I say to you, Mr. Nichols, is repent. Now, journalism, I was actually asked recently, was the world a better place when journalists, when we had 3 TV networks? And I said, well, in some ways, I guess I'm going to say yes. I grant you that that half hour of news at the end of every day was a curated stream of what a bunch of rich old white guys working for corporations in New York City wanted you to hear. I still think that their decision that an arms control treaty was more important than which Kardashian is sleeping with whom was a better curation of the news. But be that as it may, those days are past. The problem now is that we have so much bandwidth and so much cable availability. We take cable as a fact of life. Just don't be fooled by my youthful good looks. I'm actually old enough to remember when cable arrived, and when C-SPAN first went on, or CNN first went on the air. We have to fill that time. And so the market is now segmenting. If you're a liberal, you watch MSNBC. If you're a conservative, you watch Fox. If you want to read things that you often agree with in one direction, you read the Huffington Post. You want to read things in another, you read National Review or Slate or whatever it is. And people can go through their whole day saying, I watched the news, when in fact, all they've done is read a lot of stuff that they've cherry-picked to agree with them, if they read it at all. And assuming they didn't just breeze past the headlines in a Google search, because if you believe what the first 10 results in a Google search, it's pretty clear Barack Obama was born in Kenya. So journalism has, again, become a kind of marketized client servicing organization. I mean, it's almost quaint to talk about the days when the news division was the money loser in a network. Right? The news was like a public service that, the networks went, well, we gotta do something, so put on the news and we'll run a half an hour. The other thing that's different is because of the ubiquity of cable news, that people think they have watched the news when what they mean is, I have left on some video wallpaper all day that I did not actually watch. And I contrast this to when I was a boy. My parents were not educated people. I come from a working class background. I did not come from I came from a factory town in the Connecticut Valley in Massachusetts. But for that half hour, my father watched news aerobically. I mean, you could not interrupt my father watching the news. That was his half hour, and he watched it to the point of almost sweating because he felt that was important. Whereas now, you'd say, well, I'll just graze. It's a buffet. It's on all the time. It's just a big kind of, junk food buffet, and I'll take a little of this and a little of that. And people don't really watch the news so much as they sort of graze and cherry pick it. Let's say a few words about the internet, which I'm loath to do here in the heart of Silicon Valley. I love the internet. I actually do love the internet, and by middle-aged professor standards, I'm a geek. I mean, I love computers. My wife can tell you that I probably love them too much. I was an early adopter of the internet. I mean, I was one of those guys sat there with an old Netscape browser watching pages load, a line at a time while my Hayes modem went, and woke up the whole neighborhood. But I cannot deny being pessimistic that the internet is also making us stupider and meaner. It just is. It's making people dumber, and it's making them more mean than they used to be because it's replacing human interaction. And I think there's so many ways that we could blame the internet, but in the end, I blame the users. I blame the people. It's like saying, to me, it's like blaming obesity on fast food joints. No, I blame the people who eat fast food all day. When it comes to the news and the usage of the internet for educating oneself, I always say treat it like food. Vary your diet, make healthy choices, and limit your intake. And yet people who say, I don't have the time to read a newspaper, will spend hours plowing through stupid memes on Facebook from, some aunt somewhere who has decided that, Vince Foster is alive and living with Elvis. And you just cannot get people out of these habits because it's fun. It's empowering. And that's the last thing I'll say about all of this, is that what's really going on here? This attack on experts, and by experts I mean people who know things to a level of specialization that necessarily excludes lay people. The people you would ask if you needed to know something, who would you ask? That's a good first cut at who's an expert. That this attack on expertise is part of this narcissistic trend in American society. And I'm not the first one to note that. I mean, people have been writing for 40 years all the way back to Christopher Lasch about why America is becoming more narcissistic. But it's also because people feel things are out of their control. And arguing with experts in a world where everything seems to be swirling around and you can't get a grip on anything, experts who seem to know what's going on immediately become the scapegoats and become the problem. And it becomes very empowering to say, I don't believe the experts. It's all a way of the ordinary person saying, you're not the boss of me. And that recreates a certain sense of autonomy that I think people feel is lost when the world starts moving as quickly around them as it does. And we've always had this problem. There has always been an anti-intellectual streak in American society, and I would argue that that's actually a good thing. I think Americans have always had a good, solid reliance on their common sense. We are not like the old European society that we broke away from 200 years ago. We don't have an instant deference to rank and to academic achievement. We are, Tocqueville writes about it, that we tend to rely on our own kind of inner common sense about a lot of things. But it's out of control. It is completely out of control. And it is now to the point where instead of people relying on their common sense, every expert opinion about anything leads to a resentful argument from someone who feels disempowered just by having that conversation. And this is why all of the expert failure, when I was writing it, I called it the holy trinity of expert failure. When I was writing, people would say, well, I'd say, look, your doctor may get things wrong, but do you think you're living longer? Americans are living longer under the care of doctors than they lived, 100 years ago under the care of, their aunts putting mustard poultices on them. They say, okay. And then you get the holy trinity of experts. They'd say, thalidomide, Vietnam, Challenger. Yes, there's a whole chapter in the book about how and why experts can be wrong. We are human beings. We are fallible. Sometimes we're even evil and mean and do bad things and fake our credentials and kick the dog and argue with our kids. And you will never fail to find expert failure. But as I say at the end of the book, in the end, the only people that can remedy this are the voters and the citizens of the developed world, because you do have the autonomy that you think you don't. You do have access to information if you really are diligent about, again, reading a newspaper or watching an actual evening news broadcast. This is within the power of the ordinary citizen. Experts have made terrible mistakes. They have cost lives. I would argue that on balance, they've probably saved more lives. One of the arguments against my piece was a commentator in USA Today who said, and I kid you not, his actual line was, looking around the past 50 years, what have experts done for us? I guess since you're still at war with Nazi Germany and you have polio, nothing. But that is very much the attitude that experts have to deal with, and I think that's partly why experts have done something I blame experts for, and that is withdrawing from the public space. They don't want to have these kinds of arguments, and I'm a little more thick-skinned about it, and so I'm glad to be here to have this discussion with you. But I understand it's a difficult discussion on both sides, and I look forward to continuing with it.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm so glad you brought up the issue of control, because I thought about that a lot when I was reading your book. And you actually talk about, it's in the context of college, but you have this one line. There's so many things in here you want to just put on a pillow or frame and hang, on the wall in your house. But this one, you said students, but again, I think this goes further. They develop a toxic combination of insecurity and arrogance. And so there's the loss of control plus narcissism equals, sort of where we are right now. Do you think that's accurate? And I think part of the thing is, aside from ourselves sort of going out and trying to find better sources for things, what can be done?
Well, I think the first thing people can do is, and this is going to sound strange coming from an expert who has just given you 20 minutes of arrogant hectoring about why you should listen to us, but a little more humility on everybody's part, not just on the part of experts, but on the part of citizens as well. A little more good faith. I think we all, not just experts and citizens, we all have to be nicer to each other. We all have to start from the assumption that we mean each other well. I cannot tell you how many times that people have, especially since the first versions of the book came out, people said, well, of course you say these things. You're an expert. You're against us. And let's not ignore the elephant in the room. The president ran against experts. He basically went out to middle America and he said, experts are the people screwing up your lives, and I'll get even with them. I will, fix their wagon. Same thing happened. It's not just an American phenomenon. Same thing happened during Brexit. The people who were pushing the Leave campaign said, and one of them, I actually quote him in the book, he said, now this is a guy who was a lifetime British politician and minister with an education from Cambridge, okay? And he said, I think the people have had quite enough of experts. And I thought, you mean like you? But there is this assumption going in that the average citizen knows more than the expert, and that the expert is part of some nefarious, not even as a conspiracy theory, but some kind of nefarious, near-do-well kind of plan to hurt you. And I think that's really has to stop. That's part of what happens when people spend too much time in front of their computer screens, too much time alone in front of their televisions, too much time not really talking to each other. So those are the first two things I'd say is a little more humility, the way my old teacher said, repent, and also a little more goodwill in every conversation.
And it's an important point you bring up about humility, because you say one of the attractive features of a conspiracy theory is heroism.
It's very empowering.
Can you talk a little bit about how you get to be both a victim and a hero in a conspiracy theory?
That's such a great question, because conspiracy theories are, first of all, let me just say, I love conspiracy theories. I mean, I read every book Robert Ludlum wrote until he died. I mean, I was a sucker for every spy movie during the Cold War. Of course, I was a Russia specialist during the Cold War, so conspiracy theories for me were catnip, at least in fiction. I was a devoted X-Files watcher until it got kind of boring, but what makes them so attractive? Well, think about it. It explains all the things in your life that are going wrong that you can't explain. Why can't I get a job? Why did my girlfriend break up with me? Why do bad things happen to good people? Whatever it is. And it makes you heroic. I know secret things. It makes you powerful within your peer group to say, I know special stuff. It's kind of the way that geeks in Washington, I mean, there is no quicker way to quickly lose your cred, this is, from my Washington days, than to say, well, I know stuff, but it's classified. I can't tell you. You ever use that in an argument, in a political argument in Washington, D.C., people immediately tune you out because that is a loser's argument. But it's the same thing that people do to each other. So, how do I know? Well, I, have knowledge, and knowledge is power. It's understandable. Conspiracy theories aren't new. They go all the way back through American history, through human history, because we want to be able to explain why bad stuff happens that is beyond our control. And it's very comforting. Think of it this way. In some ways, it's more comforting to believe that 9/11 was an elaborate plot that took immense resources of all kinds of smart people than it is to believe that 19 guys got on some planes with box cutters. In a way, that's more terrifying than a conspiracy, because it means anybody could do it and it could happen again.
And so, it's funny, I was thinking about this book, and when you read the book, which is great, and you should buy it, there's plenty back there. When you read the book, I felt at times like I was, felt sort of curmudgeonly while I was reading the book. So it was a lot
It's a word that's been thrown at me a few times.
There's a lot of get off my lawn feeling when you're, and I'm like, yeah, and then I'm like, oh gosh, wow, what am I thinking? But it was funny. Right around the time I was going through and reading the book, I was talking to someone I work with at the news station, and she was explaining to me how a friend of hers had come to town and sat her down and tried to, and was telling her how an executive producer does their job. And this is a person never stepped foot in a newsroom before, trying to tell her. That's why we were laughing earlier, that mansplaining. This is all, none of this is really new to a lot of women. But that happened. And I thought, wow, I'm not overblowing it.
No.
This is actually, a big deal. But I wanted to ask you, as a national security expert as well, what are the implications? You say it happens all over the globe, but what are the implications for real national security issues for this thing happening daily everywhere?
Well, first of all, that's a great story, because it proves to you you're not crazy, right? You read the book and you say, well, this guy. And I was really concerned people would read the book and say, well, people just argue with this guy. I mean, he's obviously just abrasive and difficult, and I am. But it really has. People. A surgeon told me when I was writing this book. He said, I'm so glad you're writing this. He said, because I've gotten to the point where I want to put all this stuff on a tray and just push it across the table and say, you know what? You do it. He said, I've had it.
Dianne Feinstein, I'll tell you quick. Dianne Feinstein was here doing her first town hall that she's done since she's been in the Senate. And at one point, one of the people in the audience was yelling something about Syria. And she stopped and said to him, if you think you know more about Syria than I do, And I think what she said was, "Come on up to the stage," but you couldn't hear her because the applause was so loud. I think she said, "Come on up to the stage," but it was like, I've been on the Foreign Intelligence Committee for, however many years. If you think you really know more.
So you admit you're part of the conspiracy.
Yeah, right.
I mean, and that's what happens. So, now, in the book, and the foreign affairs question is just so crucial to our national security. In the book, I related a story of a 2014. Well, there's two polls in there, and they're both great stories. But one of them is about Ukraine. And people were asked, what should we do about Ukraine? And the people who had the strongest views on Ukraine were the people least likely to know where it was. And by least likely, I mean they were placing Ukraine in places like South America. The average respondent in a 2014, this included a fair tranche of college graduates, that they asked them where Ukraine was. The median respondent in this poll was off by 1,800 miles. That means that the single largest country in Europe, which is Ukraine, not Russia, because it's entirely in Europe, the single largest country in Europe, and a fair number of Americans couldn't even put it on the right continent. Now, the other one was about a mischievous poll. It was actually done by a group of liberal pollsters who thought they were going to catch out Republicans, and it turns out that they dragnetted everybody into looking stupid. They asked Americans how they felt about whether we should bomb Agrabah. And, of course, most Republicans were in favor of bombing Agrabah, aggressive, warmongers that they are. But it turns out a lot of Democrats had very strong feelings about not bombing Agrabah. It was very important to not do that because they're a much more peaceful group of people. Agrabah is the country in the 1992 Aladdin film, animated film Aladdin. Doesn't exist. It's a cartoon. So what they found out by accident was about half the people they've polled had a strong opinion about bombing a cartoon. Now, on the road, people would say, well, you can cherry pick these. Okay, about 2 weeks ago, the Washington Post had a map. And it's a map of everything from the Caspian Sea pretty much out to the Pacific. And it's all covered with pink dots from Australia to Azerbaijan up to Siberia. And what you realized is every pink dot represented the guess of an adult American respondent about where North Korea is. Oh, yes. Now, what really struck me was the people who put it in Australia, you just say, well, these are people who probably don't know where their car is most of the time. What struck me was how many people got it on the Korean Peninsula, had a 50-50 chance of putting it on the north side of a line and got it wrong. And the name is in the name, North Korea. So what implication does that have for national security? It means that people are voting on very important issues and sending demand messages to their elected representatives based on not knowing stuff. Now, one of the things that having worked in Washington and being an educator, people say, you elites, particularly the elected representatives, they don't listen to us enough. My argument is they are listening to you too much. That actually the biggest problem with the United States right now is that your elected representatives, who were created in a Burkean system of Republican government where they are supposed to add their judgment, are in fact doing what the public's telling them to do. Of course, people think NATO is obsolete and not very important. They have no idea where NATO is. They have no idea how much the United States pays for NATO. I'll give you a similar example. Foreign aid. Most people in America, you ask them about foreign aid, they say we have to cut foreign aid, slash it. It's huge. Respondents, when you ask them how much America devotes to foreign aid, the median respondent is anywhere between 10 and 25% of the U.S. budget. The real number is less than 0.75%. 5 to 10% of people interviewed about this will tell you that foreign aid constitutes at least half of the budget of the United States. Now, how can you have an intelligent interaction with the voters when they think that 10 to 25 or even 50% of the United States budget is based on foreign aid? You simply cannot have the public informing policy because they don't know what they're talking about. It's like the public asking you to finally ban unicorns. It's not an intelligent conversation. So this has dire implications. When we have a rogue nuclear power that is destabilizing the entire Pacific and perhaps the entire world, the fact that there are people who think it's in the middle of the Caspian Sea is a problem. So I think, if anything, that level of ignorance about foreign affairs means that national security policy and foreign policy, increasingly the distance between the public and the experts who have to function and just make American diplomacy run every day, that distance is going to get bigger because you simply cannot get intelligent, coherent answers out of the public.
And what do you do though? I mean, if somebody says, no, it's here, it's down here near Sydney. Part of the problem is, it seems like, in addition to sort of what we can do ourselves to be better citizens in the world, like how do you even begin? Because I'm sure we've all got families. I've got a family member who is convinced that there's a media conspiracy, and I keep explaining, no, I'm in the room.
Right.
Like when decisions are made, I promise you, we're not getting together to figure out how to get one over on you. We're just trying to figure out who's available for an interview, frankly, more than anything. So it's when you get run up against a brick wall like that, what on earth, can we do?
I had the problem you had once when I was working in Washington. One of my uncles, who was he was actually an early Trump adopter. He was wearing a Trump hat back in 2000.
Wow.
And because anybody that annoyed the establishment, he was, despite the fact that he was, pretty well off and collecting Social Security and had a stock portfolio and all that stuff, he wanted to stick it to the bad guys. And he said, they're all corrupt, all of them. And I said, in Washington, everybody in Washington is corrupt. And I said, I work in Washington. He said, well, then you're corrupt too. And I said,
at least he's consistent.
And he did, because he didn't know what else to say. And, we all went, okay, pass the potatoes, and just get past that. People ask me, how do you deal with your family about stuff like this? And my answer is always, how much do you like your family? Because you are not going to be able to deal with this gently. And this is actually an important question about moving forward, because a lot of folks who've read the book or people who are in the teaching profession say, how can we do this gently? How can we move people from here to there? And I said, well, in a classroom in particular, that's a different question. I think, though, in public and in personal relationships, I've given up on the gentle approach. I just turn to people and say, you're just wrong. You're just wrong. And I don't really care if it makes you mad. We're not going to have fundamental disagreements about whether North Korea whether there are kangaroos in North Korea. We're not having that discussion, and you're wrong. And if you think that's disrespectful, I'm sorry. It's actually disrespectful to me to tell me that I must begin from the assumption that North Korea is in Australia is a reasonable assumption. And I think I've been arguing for. I think experts
does that
need
work?
to get out there.
Do they say, oh, well, let me go and check the almanac and rethink this?
I don't know, but I think one thing, it's certainly less wear and tear on me, for one thing. But also, I think one of the dangers in this is that when you start to grant when you start with you believe Australia, you believe that North Korea is in Australia. Well, okay. That's an important point, and I understand. And then now you're just lost, because then you're on the territory of that person who says, and now that we're talking about it, I have some sources over here from InfoWars and Breitbart and lunatic.com and wherever I'm getting them. And I think it's important for experts to just plant that flag right away and say, I promise not to condescend to you. And I know I fail at this on Twitter and social media. I can be really snippy and snarky and condescending. And I'll issue a blanket apology now, but I'm going to tell you all it's going to happen again. But I think while it's important not to condescend, it's important not to patronize either. Because I think when somebody says, I think North Korea is in Australia, it's really insulting for somebody who knows better to say, that's so interesting. That's great. No, you're not doing that person any favors. And in fact, in some ways, you're being disrespectful. And you're certainly failing in your job as an expert. If someone said to you, you have a background in the law, somebody said to me after the 2010 elections, well, now that the Republicans have taken the House, they can remove President Obama. And I said, no, they can't. I said, the Senate would, and they said, where are you getting this? I said, where are you reading the Constitution of the United States? I had a guy stand up I did a book a few years back on war and the United Nations, and all my books are depressing. And a guy in the back raised his hand. He said, excuse me, professor, are you telling me that one country, this actually happened, as God is my witness, are you telling me that one country at the United Nations can hold up everybody with one vote? I said, yes, that's what I didn't start by saying, well, I said,
Actually, fine.
yes, I said, yes, that's what I'm telling you. And he got angry, and he said, well, how long has this been going on? And I said, since 1945. And he said, I have witnesses. He said, does our Supreme Court know this? And I said, they've been briefed. Now, I don't think in a conversation like that you could say, well, now why do you think that isn't true? You just do your job as an expert. Stand and say, no, that's not true. No, you're wrong. And if you want, I'll explain it to you. But I'm not going to play pretend that you somehow knew something coming into this, because that just wastes your time and it wastes mine.
Well, I wanted to. I've got a question here. Oh, wow! Look at all this. I want you to tell I want you to tell the Dartmouth story, because it's just one of my favorites.
Oh yeah.
But we also have a question here that's related. Somebody wrote in. What are the 2 or 3 things you wish every professor would say at the beginning of the semester?
Repent.
Especially those who are teaching things like political science or philosophy. What do you think? What do you wish they would say at the beginning of the semester? But also, if you would tell that Dartmouth story, that'd be
well. I can only tell you how I teach, and again, I don't represent the opinions of my institutions, including the War College. I teach military officers during the day, and I teach undergraduates at night. So I get a full kind of range of them. And with the teaching military students is a little bit of a different art. It's very rarefied skill, so it's not really applicable here. But certainly for 30 years that I've been teaching undergraduates, I always tell them the same thing. Look, I don't care about your politics, and it's not that I don't care in the sense that I don't care about you as a person, but that I don't really care. I won't hold anything against you, because you're here to form opinions, not to have opinions verified. You're here to learn stuff, and this will go on long after you and I are done. What I care about is that you do the assigned reading that I'm giving you, and that you give your best effort in class. I always tell my students, I'm happy to be Lake Wobegon. All the students can get an A. You can all be above average if you put the effort into it. And nothing you say can or will be held against you, in this courtroom, this classroom, because I don't run a classroom that way. Now, there are professors who do that, who say, I am the oracle, you are stupid. I think the bigger problem is actually that. Remember the old Paper Chase? Remember that movie? Professor Kingsfield. Here's a dime. Go call your mother. I don't do that. I wish I could. Sometimes I would love to do that scene. I think the problem is actually in the other direction. And what I wish teachers would stop saying is, I learn as much from my students as they learn from me. No. If that's true, you stink as a teacher. It's not an even exchange. They should be learning more from you than you're learning from them. And so, I also go in there and say, argue with me all you want. That's why we're here. That's what a classroom is for. But don't walk out being angry if I correct you. That's my job. My writing students, I teach a writing class, and I say, I'm not here to tell you your writing is awesome. I'm here to tell you what's broken and how to fix it. And I am starting from the assumption that most of you have stuff in your writing that's broken, because we all do. And they just look at me and say, but I've always had really good grades. And I say, well, that's welcome to me. At Dartmouth, when I first got to Dartmouth in the 90s, there was a legendary story about a now passed away astrophysicist named Robert, and his head just went out of my own story. I just lost the Jastrow, Robert Jastrow. He's an astrophysicist. And he was also a big fan of the SDI program of Star Wars. And a student, of course, this was the 80s, and students wanted to argue about this because Reagan was evil and Star Wars was awful. And I'm not a missile defense proponent myself, but Robert Jastrow was a pretty smart guy in his day. And the student finally, after arguing with him about this over and over, sat down and said, well, okay, your guess is as good as mine. And Jastrow stopped him right there and he said, no. My guesses are much, much better than yours. And I think more teachers should do that. I mean, we are not in a classroom. We are participating in something very important together, but we are not peers. Teachers and students are not peers. And that is one of the most corrosive ideas to creep into higher education in the past 40 years. And it's really a bad thing.
Well, so I have a question here. And it says in quotes, they lack critical thinking skills. Isn't this just the recourse of an established authority whose outmoded and incorrect ideas have been challenged?
Well, whoever said that is wrong. No, critical thinking, if you really want to challenge the establishment, critical thinking is your strongest weapon. Rigid, ideological, resentful, closed thinking is what lets people control your life. Because once they figure out the pattern, once they figure out your cognitive map about the things you love to believe, it's easy to manipulate you. Critical thinkers are the hardest people to get over on because they're the ones that always stop and ask another question, even a question that may be uncomfortable for them. To say that, critical thinking is just this whitewash of, oh, stop asking questions. No, critical thinking is the thing that says, start asking questions and don't be afraid of where they go. And I think that's a really important skill. And it's something that people don't want to do because real critical thinking challenges everybody. I mean, look, I've written things where I've had to change my mind. This morning, I was on KGO this morning, and Ron pulled out a piece that I'd written in 2009 that has things in it that I'm not really happy about anymore. And I said, stupid experts always writing stuff down, darn it. If only we could burn all the paper in the world. But, it was okay to say, look, I said something, and I've thought about it, and people argued with me, and I've changed my mind. It's okay to change your mind. I started my career as a young Cold Warrior. And I have now come, 30 years later. My last book before this was about why we need to engage in unilateral reductions in nuclear arms and get rid of the damn things. You can change your mind, but that starts by being open to changing your mind, which is the key to critical thinking. I don't think you should be so open-minded, as the expression goes, that your brain falls out. But this notion that, critical thinking is just a weapon of the establishment. No, the critical thinking is what the establishment, insofar as one even exists in our very modern time, is your best weapon for dealing with whatever's coming over your TV screen or through your radio or from some, middle-aged professor talking to you, in the middle of a room. It's an important skill to develop. And again, at the root of it is a certain amount of humility and a dedication to logic and empiricism, no matter where it leads, even when it goes places you don't happen to like.
We've got a couple questions here about the media. We've got, as one person asked, how can trust be restored in the media? And another person asked a sort of related question, what news sources do you trust?
Well, you. Right. So, I'll take the second part first and say something that is going to make people's heads explode. I actually trust most sources in the media. I've worked with a lot of journalists and I've talked with a lot of journalists from National Review to Mother Jones, across the spectrum. By the way, when I worked in the Senate for a Republican senator, I subscribed to The Nation and Mother Jones to keep myself honest. I read them regularly. I got all my other stuff, and I got conservative journals, and I made sure to subscribe to at least 2 left-wing journals just to make sure that I was keeping myself honest. So that's one piece of advice. I think most journalists, they're experts. They're human beings. They make mistakes. There is spin, there is bias, there are nothing burgers that are made into stories. Journalists make stupid mistakes every day. But I really believe that most journalists in the United States of America really, and in the Western world, and in Russia, where being a journalist is a life-threatening occupation. They really are committed to getting out the truth. That is a set of facts that then people can read and make decisions on their own. Are there lousy journalists who spin stories in the direction of their own confirmation bias? Yes, there are. So what? There are bad judges too, but that doesn't mean I want to get rid of the judicial system and that I don't trust most judges. The fact of the matter is, my experience over the years, and I say this now, I actually once had a beef with a journalist who I felt ambushed me and misquoted me. And I kind of, this was a long time ago, but still practicing journalist, I ran into her at a conference, and I kind of, across the table, I did one of these, I said, and she went, kind of like shrugging, like, yeah, I could have done that one better, and I kind of screwed you over, and I'm sorry. It happens. And you know what? If you're big boys and girls and you're willing to keep reading the news every day, you will be able to correct for that and to get the basic facts out of almost any news story. First thing you should do, no matter what form of news you're reading, is to make sure that you know that you're reading the news section, not the opinion or the analysis section. That's a big division right there. I miss paper newspapers because you knew that what was above the fold on the front page was a factual representation as best they could get it, and on the back was guys like me bloviating about what we think. I still think most journalists try to aim for that above the fold level of accuracy. And again, I think you should approach it with a certain amount of goodwill. Does the media today, do they hate President Trump? Yes, there's no argument about that. There is no doubt that the American media, hates the current administration. Do they at least try to get their reporting right? I think they do. And I think that's really important. What do I read? As an old, DC Hill rat, I read and a think tanker and all that time I spent in DC. I start my day with the Washington Post. If you want to start with the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, this is a real conversation I actually had. Somebody said, "What do you read?" And I said, "Well, the Washington Post." And they said, "Well, that's just DC Beltway elitists." I said, "Well, all right, the New York Times." They said, "New York elitists." I said, "The Wall Street Journal, capitalists." I said, in other words, what you're saying is you don't want to read anything. You want to go find stuff that you already agree with and have somebody tell you it's right. There are a lot of, the Boston Globe, the LA Times, what is it in San Francisco? The Chronicle, right? I mean, there are thousands of newspapers and journalistic sources all across this country that can't all be lying to you. And the best way to get the best story is to read two of them. There's an old saying, a man with two watches never knows what time it is. But I think if you read two newspapers, you can actually start correcting for bias. And it doesn't take you that long. Because the other thing people always say to me about this is, well, I just don't have the time. Yes, you do. Just stop. You do have the time. If you think of all the time in an average day you waste doing nothing, playing computer games, or arguing with people on Twitter, you can be reading a newspaper. I start my day with at least two newspapers, but I'm a news junkie. But if the average American started with one, that'd be great. And read it from front to back or from top to bottom on the internet. Don't pick through it. This is the other thing that's kind of interesting about the move to paper, from paper to electrons. People don't start with a book and read page 1 and then finish it. They go to the index or they do a search to see what's in there that they're already interested in. They don't go to a newspaper to start at the top and read the headlines and work their way down through the sections. They say, where's the thing in here that I'm already interested in that I want to hear about? And I think that's just a really bad way. So it's not just what to read, it's how to read.
So this person wants to know, would you be willing to debate, it looks like it's Nicholas Nassim Taleb or Scott Adams?
Oh. Well, Nicholas Nassim Taleb, now I have to talk about two other guys whose work I don't like, but I will, because I'm an expert and I'm engaging in critical thinking, whoever wrote that. Taleb is the guy who wrote the book, The Black Swan. And he says, experts trying to predict something is stupid. The experts, especially in politics and in soft fields like, other than engineering, that we're just selling you a bunch of hooey and we don't really know what we're talking about. He coined the term intellectual yet idiot. Taleb has already said that he will never write for Foreign Affairs again because they published me. So the question isn't whether I'd debate Taleb, it's whether Taleb would debate me.
You're super important.
I gave him a sleepless night. I think Taleb's part of the problem, to be honest with you. Taleb is one of the people who has a very narrow expertise that then he uses to say that basically he's Homer Simpson. Everybody is stupid but me. And I think that doesn't get us anywhere. I mean, that's intellectual nihilism. Nobody knows anything except the super, narrow specialization. Public intellectuals are all full of steam, and predicting is pointless and useless. I have a long section in the book about Experts predict because you, the public, you want us to. And we get it wrong, but nobody wants to hear an expert on Russia say, listen, I don't really have any idea what's going to happen. Because I do have some idea what's going to happen. And we can do the best we can, and we can try to have a track record. I got it wrong about Putin. I said, maybe Putin will work out. The first year or two, I said, maybe he's going to do some things. He won't turn out to be horrible. I was wrong. On the other hand, people say, so you were wrong about that. Yeah, on the other hand, I also predicted the Soviet coup 6 months ahead of time because I had better chops from reading Russian and Soviet newspapers than the average person. We get things right and we get things wrong. So I think Taleb just leads you down a dead end of everybody's stupid, nothing can be predicted. Scott Adams, look, Dilbert's one of the greatest comic strips ever written. And I think as a political analyst, Scott Adams is a great cartoonist. I quoted him in the book. He said, tell me any issue that a president needs to know, any issue in public policy that I can't master after talking for an hour with an expert. Now, talk about hubris. Talk about, a lack of humility. If you think I can get you up to speed on Russia policy and arms control, nuclear stuff in an hour, then one of us is really bad at this. People like Adams have a notion that expertise can be transferred like copying files from a disk. I just have a lot of random information, and if I just kind of, plug into you and hit copy, an hour later, you'd be like, yeah, I got this. And that leaves out things like judgment, experience, learning from being wrong, interacting with other experts, being part of a community that kind of checks itself. All of that stuff goes out the window. So, I don't really have any interest in debating either of these guys because I just don't take either of them that seriously.
All right. On that note, one quick reminder, you're listening to the Commonwealth Club of California program, and our guest is Tom Nichols, professor of National Security Affairs at the U.S. Naval War College, who is discussing the subject matter of his new book, The Death of Expertise. I'm Melissa Kane, and you can hear the Commonwealth Club programs on the radio and catch up with program videos on the club's YouTube channel, plus find us on Facebook and Twitter. I have a question here that says, and I suspect the answer is yes, but the question is this trend causing experts to lay low? Like, are we losing an important voice in this debate when experts sort of say, forget it, and so what's left is
yes.
a lot of non-experts?
Yes, you're not losing those experts so much as you are, you are losing some experts. Because again, college is turning into something different than college. And expertise is turning into this idea that it's something you can gain from a 4-year program and then you have it, like being an electrical engineer. And that's not even true among engineers. Again, experience. How do you become a master electrician? Other master electricians have decided you're that good. It's different than becoming an electrician. Becoming a master, having enough time in your field. And I think people are saying, I don't want to do that. I want shortcuts. Kids who go into journalism, for example, say, I'm not writing obituaries for the small town newspaper. I want to graduate from college with a degree in journalism, and I want to go right to writing for the New York Times. Unfortunately, that leads to a lot of really dumb stories that force a lot of really dumb corrections because that's just a bad idea. What the existing experts are doing, however, is choosing only to talk to other experts. They don't want to be sitting here in a group of lay people and fielding questions because they find it exasperating and they think that they're under attack, and frankly in this political climate they are. And that's really dangerous for democracy because, as I say at the end of the book, the collapse of expertise in a republic is dangerous for 2 reasons. One is that you simply stop listening to experts and you get mob rule, right? And the amazing thing is, in a democracy, usually there's a lot of misery when people get exactly what they want. H.L. Mencken once said, democracy is the theory that the working man knows what he wants and deserves to get it good and hard. So that's the danger of that, because then things fall apart. The other danger, and I think the one we're actually heading toward, is technocracy, where experts simply say, you know what, talking to the average person, it's over their head, they don't want to hear it, it's too difficult, we'll just talk to each other and we'll just make things run and we won't ask them because we can't get a coherent answer out of them and it's too difficult and it's too aggravating and we'll just do it and we'll keep it on the down.
Well, what's the alternative? To have the expert engage in, the endless Twitter war, or with people. I mean,
Well, that's been my solution. And this is where I chide experts. I say, you know what? If you want to wear that badge of expert, if you want to, then I guess you have to get, you're going to have to get your hands dirty, and you're going to have to talk to your client, which is society. And I do think experts have to get out there. And I do think we have to rehabilitate the notion of the public intellectual, regardless of what people like Taleb think about it. That people who have not just expertise in a subject, but kind of broad training in critical thinking, how to think through a problem, how to help the public kind of weigh costs and benefits and work their way through complicated issues. But experts don't want to do that because then they get called a lot of ugly names, and here we are.
Are we spoiled? I mean, is some of this? I mean, you give an example. We got one yes here. Well, one example you give is the example of you get into an elevator, right? And you don't have to think, oh, I hope I make it. You can get in and say, oh, okay, well, it's been certified, and some nerds have put this together in a way that it's going to work. And so you don't have to actually sort of think through that. And so, you can, sort of go through your day relying on everything running.
And people would say, oh, well, the elevator, I said in the book, I say, the certificate in an elevator doesn't say good luck up there. It says that this has been, examined. And people say, well, that's, again, STEM, great, engineers. No. There are civic codes. There are things that your legislators had to do, from the city council to the state legislature in Sacramento, all the way back to Washington, D.C., to make sure that an elevator is safe. It involved people who have expertise in physics to people who have expertise in policymaking and legislative drafting. That's how that got done. That's why you can go up the side of a building and not have to pray the rosary, okay? So yes, I would argue that the death of expertise, and I've said this many times, is a disease of affluence. For example, the anti-vaccine business. I imagine in this area.
I'm going to say, look out, I don't know.
I hope there's get an escort to the door. But the fact of the matter is, people can have this kind of sense of empowerment about refusing vaccines when everybody's healthy. That's the kind of thing you say, well, I mean, it's almost like a catch-22. I don't need these vaccines. Who's ever seen measles, right? We don't need it. Well, totally missing the point that, or smallpox. Now, being of a certain age, I gladly took, I was vaccinated both for smallpox and polio because there were people within my family that I knew personally that had polio, and within our living memory who had smallpox. The thought of, every time I saw my cousin limp from polio, there wasn't enough vaccine in the world to give me as a kid. That now, with all of that gone, people would say, well, this is, again, it's personal empowerment. Some doctor told me this, but what do doctors know? I've had people tell me, doctors, they don't know anything about heart disease. They don't know anything about vaccines or infectious diseases. Again, you can see why that surgeon said, you know what? You got a point. Here, do it yourself. And so I think that, what will end that? A pandemic.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, in terms of, you write here, we've come full circle from a pre-modern age in which folk wisdom filled unavoidable gaps in human knowledge, then a period of development based heavily on specialization and expertise, and now we're sort of in this post-industrial information-oriented world. It seems like the reason why we went from, using, folk wisdom to expertise was, problems that you sort of collectively have to solve, and you realize, oh, leeches aren't just going to solve everything. We got to do some other stuff. Is that what it's going to take? Again, a lot of pain to realize you actually do need a master electrician. You actually do need a vaccine or some other kind of specialist.
I hope not. I wrote the book because I hope not, and I wanted to start that argument ahead of time. But if you think about the populism of the 1930s, that's one of the reasons that experts were ascendant in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. People wonder, how do we get to this place where experts are so powerful? Well, because we delegated to them rebuilding the ashes of a completely destroyed world in which 65 million people were killed because of, in large part because of a lot of populist nonsense about not joining the League of Nations and economic protectionism and mass movements. And And then so experts afterwards said, okay, why don't we build a global system of trade and cooperation and alliances to maybe not let that happen again? The same people who think experts are dastardly are probably people that think, well, yet here we have a United Nations. I mean, we have, global trade agreements. We have the World Health Organization. Those are all important things, and I don't want to see us have to do that all over again. And I'm hoping we have that discussion first, while there's still peace and prosperity and good health, before we stumble down into that darkness again.
Wow. On that note, we've reached the point in our program where we are going to say thank you to Dr. Tom Nichols here for coming out and being with us today. He's the professor of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College and the author of the new book, The Death of Expertise, The Campaign Against Established Knowledge and Why It Matters. Thank you to our audience, both here and also on radio, television, and the internet. We also want to remind everyone here that copies of Dr. Nichols' book are for sale, and he'll be pleased to sign them in this room following the program. I'm Melissa Kane of CBS 5 KPIX, and now this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, the place where you're in the know, is adjourned.